All right, let's dive into a story that starts as a simple trip for food, but turns into this massive, life-altering confrontation. We're talking about a 20-year-old secret, a family just on the edge of starvation, and a brother. A brother they were sure was dead who now somehow holds their entire lives in his hands. This is the incredible story of Genesis chapter 42. You know, this one line from verse 9, this is the key. It unlocks everything. The moment Joseph sees his brothers bowing down, it's like a lightning bolt. A dream from when he was just a boy flashes in his mind. And suddenly, this isn't just about selling grain anymore. Oh no, this is prophecy coming to life. And every single thing that happens from this point on is shaped by that old betrayal and a future he saw in a dream. So our story kicks off in a land that's been just bleached by famine. The whole world is starving. And for this one father, Jacob, the only sliver of hope for his family lies at the end of a long, dangerous journey into a foreign land. Okay, let's walk through this moment by moment. Verse 1. Just picture the scene. This awful famine has its grip on everything. Jacob, the old patriarch, looks at his 10 grown sons, and they're just standing there, staring at each other, helpless. He finally just snaps. Why are you just looking at each other? You can almost hear the desperation, right? And then, verse 2. He gives the order. He points to the horizon, saying, I've heard there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some so we can live and not die. The stakes couldn't be clearer. This is a mission to outrun death itself. So, verse 3. The 10 brothers, they obey. They get their donkeys ready and set off for Egypt. But wait, look closely at verse 4. Someone's missing. Jacob will not let Benjamin, Joseph's only full brother, go with them. And why? He says, lest some calamity befall him. Just think about that for a second. The memory of losing Joseph is still this raw, open wound. He cannot stand the thought of losing the last piece of his beloved wife Rachel. And verse 5 reminds us they weren't the only ones. It was like a river of people flowing to Egypt because this famine was everywhere. So the brothers finally get to Egypt, this land of incredible power and strange customs. They're just there to buy some food, but they are about to come face to face with the second most powerful man in the entire kingdom. And they have absolutely no idea that he is their own flesh and blood. Verse 6 throws us right into the throne room. Joseph is the governor, the one man in charge of all the grain. And here come his brothers. They bow down before him, their faces pressed right into the dirt, exactly like his dream. Then comes verse 7. The air is electric. Joseph looks down, and he knows them. Instantly. But he puts on a mask. His face turns to stone, his voice gets hard, and he barks at them. Where do you come from? Verse 8 gives us this incredible secret that hangs over the whole scene. Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And then, bam, verse 9. While they're still on the floor, it all comes rushing back to him. The dream, the sheaves of wheat, the sun, the moon, the stars, it's all happening. And right then and there, he decides his play. He points a finger and makes the one accusation that will terrify them. You are spies. Well, they just panic. Verse 10, no, my lord, your servants have only come to buy food. In verse 11, they're trying to prove they're trustworthy. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. But Joseph's face is like a granite wall. In verse 12, he just repeats it. No, you're spies. So in verse 13, they play their last card, their family story. We were 12 brothers. The youngest is back home with our father, and one is no more. Can you believe it? They are unknowingly telling the very brother they sold into slavery that he's dead. The irony is just staggering. But Joseph doesn't even flinch. In verse 14, he completely dismisses their story. It is just as I said, you were spies. And then he delivers the punishment. Verse 17, he put them all together in prison for 3 days. Just like that. 3 days in a dark, foreign prison with a death sentence for spying hanging over their heads. You can only imagine their absolute terror. After 3 days stewing in that prison, Joseph comes back with a new deal. Verse 19 lays it all out. If you're really honest men, one of you will stay here locked up. The rest of you can take grain for your starving families. But here's the real test, the hook, in verse 20. You must bring your youngest brother back to me. That's how you'll prove your story and you won't die. He's demanding the one person he knows their father would never, ever willingly give up. It's a brilliant and kind of cruel test. You know, this impossible demand, it does something Joseph might not have even seen coming. It doesn't just create a problem for them to solve. It shatters this wall they've spent 20 years building around their past. The door to an old crime is kicked wide open, and all that buried guilt just comes flooding out. Now check out their reaction in verse 21. It is stunning. They don't curse the governor. They don't blame Egypt. They look right at each other and say, "We are truly guilty concerning our brother." For the first time in 2 decades, they're actually talking about it. They can still see his face. They can still hear him begging from the bottom of that pit. And they remember how they just ignored him. They're convinced this isn't random. This is cosmic justice. This is payback. And then Reuben, the oldest, he twists the knife in verse 22. He turns on them and says, "Didn't I tell you? Didn't I say, do not sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen, and now his blood is on our hands." He's not just reminding them of their guilt, he's telling them this day of reckoning was always, always coming for them. But here is the secret, the one thing they have no way of knowing. Verse 23 tells us Joseph has been using an interpreter this whole time, so they think he's just some foreigner who can't understand a word they're saying, but he has heard every single word of their confession. And in verse 24, the weight of it all just breaks him. He has to turn away from them and weep, but he pulls himself together. This isn't the time for a reunion. He comes back, and to lock his plan in, he points at Simeon and has him bound right there in front of them. The hostage is taken. The test is on. So the 9 remaining brothers load up their donkeys, their heads just spinning. They've got the food to save their family, but they've had to leave a brother behind as a hostage. What they don't get is that Joseph's test is far from over. He's just sprung a new, totally invisible trap. Okay, look at this. Verse 25. Secretly, Joseph gives an order. Fill their sacks with grain, sure, but also put every man's money right back in his sack. Now this isn't kindness. This is psychological warfare. It's designed to make them look like thieves and send them spiraling into absolute panic. And so in verse 26, the brothers, with no clue what's happened, load up their donkeys and start the long trip home. And then the trap springs. Verse 27, they stop for the night at an inn. One of the brothers opens his sack to get some feed for his donkey, and his blood just runs cold. There it is, the pouch of silver he used to pay for the grain sitting right on top. Can you imagine that feeling? That pure, stomach-dropping dread? Verse 28 shows us exactly where their minds go. He shows his brothers, and the text says, their hearts failed them. They don't think, oh, wow, we got a refund. No. Their guilty consciences immediately jump to the worst possible conclusion. This is punishment from God. They cry out, what is this that God has done to us? They feel this invisible hand of judgment closing right around their neck. They race home, hearts just pounding the whole way. Verses 29 through 34 are basically them frantically retelling the whole nightmare to their father. They tell Jacob everything about this powerful lord of the land who was so hostile, how he accused them of being spies, how they had to tell their whole family story just to stay alive. And then they have to deliver the impossible ultimatum. Simeon is a hostage, and the only way to free him is to go back with Benjamin. And just when Jacob thinks the story cannot possibly get any worse, verse 35 delivers the final, soul-crushing blow. As they're emptying all the sacks of grain, one by one, a bundle of money tumbles out of every single one. That discovery at the inn wasn't a fluke, it was deliberate. Now they all look like thieves. The fear in that room must have been suffocating. For the 9 brothers, this is a crisis of survival, of politics. But for their father Jacob, this isn't about grain or some foreign ruler. For him, this is a ghost from his past. And it's ripping open the deepest, most painful wound of his entire life. The breaking point hits in verse 36. Jacob looks at his sons and he just lets out this cry of pure fatherly pain. You have bereaved me. You've stolen my children from me. He starts listing his losses like they're fresh wounds. Joseph is gone. Now Simeon is gone. And you want to take Benjamin too? Everything is against me. You see, for him, this isn't about losing sons in general. It's about losing the last 2 sons of Rachel, the wife he loved more than life itself. Reuben, just desperate to fix this mess, makes this awful, crazy vow in verse 37. He tells his father, you can kill my own 2 sons if I don't bring Benjamin back. He's willing to sacrifice his own children. But Jacob's grief is like a fortress. His reply in verse 38 is absolute. It is final. My son will not go down with you, he says. His brother is dead, and he is all I have left. If anything happens to him, you will send my gray hair down to the grave in sorrow. The conversation is over. The pain of losing Joseph 20 years ago makes risking Benjamin completely impossible. And so the chapter ends right there, in this impossible stalemate. Simeon is rotting in an Egyptian prison, the famine is getting worse by the day, and Jacob is paralyzed by his own grief, refusing to let go of his last beloved son. The entire fate of this family now rests on one person, that powerful governor in Egypt. But what's his real plan? Is this all just some elaborate, cold-blooded scheme for revenge? Or is this a painful, dangerous path toward putting a broken family back together? That's the question we're left with.